In the 1950s, the indigenous land management system in the Arabian Peninsula, known as the Himma, was abolished. This system had preserved the fertility of Arabian landscapes for thousands of years. But once it was eliminated, a tragedy of the commons occurred, and a process of desertification began, which continues today. For the tribal communities in El Beida, an area about 50 kilometers south of Mecca, desertification made it impossible for them to feed their animals on their lands. In order to buy imported feed, they began to cut down trees to be sold as firewood. Between mismanaged grazing and tree cutting, the desertification became worse, as did the people's prospects for making a living on their lands. The result was a degraded, desolate, and dehydrated landscape.
كل الوادي هذا من هنا لراس الوادي. الوادي من هناك وانت صار نازل ما تشوفها من الشجار أشياء كذا ما يرغبون كثير، لكن الوادي كان مليان أشجار كبار روح الجيزة ما تمسكه.
وريني كيف؟
العود حقها الجيز حقها كبير زي البرميل. أشجار كلام صحيح مو كذب. كانت الوادي هنا مليان منها الوادي هذا.
كلها انقطعت.
كلها انقطعت.
ليش انقطعت؟
الحطابين، في ناس حطابين.
In 2009, Their Royal Highnesses Princess Haifa Al Faisal and Princess Nouf bint Fahd went to El Beida. They visited many of the families in their homes and decided to help them. This was the beginning of the El Beida project. I joined the El Beida project in 2010 as the fourth co-founder, along with the two princesses and Mona Hamdi. The project's vision was ambitious: to help the Bedou families of El Beida build a sustainable and self-sufficient community, integrating housing, infrastructure, and sustainable economic development. The foundational objective was sustainability in the environmental, social, and economic realms. It was my job to design and prototype a system that would restore ecological function to the land, reverse the desertification of the previous generations, and create a new economic base integrated with the people's heritage and culture. As ecological degradation and poverty were deeply intertwined, my job was to create rural wealth through ecological regeneration. I moved to El Beida in October of 2010, staying in a room at the local magistrate's office. With the help of the local sheikhs, I recruited a team of local Bedou that worked with me in prototyping a regenerative agriculture for the area. I was the first non-Muslim and the first American most people in El Beida had ever met. The climate in El Beida is daunting. We average 60 millimeters of rain a year, and the temperature reaches 50 degrees Celsius in July and August. The climate is hyper-arid, and the land is non-arable. The ecological degradation is extreme, with no significant natural resources to work with, no soil, no water, and almost no biological capital. It is a landscape made desolate by decades of desertification. Our tools and the building blocks we had available to us were nothing but mountains and stone, sunlight, dust, and floods. With permission from the tribes, the local magistrate, and the governorate, we selected a site comprising a 90-acre watershed, including mountains, wadis, and a floodplain. Jeff Lawton from the Permaculture Research Institute assisted in the site selection and some of the early design. A key characteristic of El Beida's geography are the mountains and the floods that flow out of them. All deserts flood, particularly mountainous deserts, and the floods in the Mecca region are dangerous. But we knew that floods were also the only sustainable source of water in the region. Thus our objective was to slow down the floods in the mountains, enabling the water to sink into the ground once it hit the floodplain. This water would be the foundation for a silvopasture system, a savanna-oriented agroecology for re-establishing sustainable grazing patterns while providing resilience through tree crops. We began work at the top of our little demonstration site, focusing on low-tech passive systems. For 3 years, we worked in the mountains, basing our work on a mix of Incan and Nabatean systems. In the floodplain, we built structures to spread water across the landscape, slow it down, and get it in the ground. In those first 3 years, it only rained 4 times. More than once, our structures were washed out or flooded away, but each rainfall was nature's way of giving us feedback, and this feedback gave us the knowledge to iterate, improving our designs and modifying our approach. In 2012, we planted our first trees, and by 2015 had planted over 4,000 trees, where fewer than 150 had been living before. We trialed 10 different species, each of which we thought would have both an economic and ecological impact. We used drip irrigation, sourced from a local well or from desalination plants, to nurture the system through this time. During the winters, we worked in the mountains, on our flood systems, and we planted trees. Floods were a risk, but the temperatures were cool enough for daytime work. During the summers, we had to work nights, as the daytime was too hot. But we couldn't work nights in the mountains. When we tried, we were faced with camel spiders, scorpions, puff adders, and other dangerous fauna. Thus, in the summers, we did construction projects in the valleys. We experimented with earth bag structures, building a pigeon house and our main gate with that methodology. We also built a bat house using earth ships as a model. We built our headquarters using an insulated concrete formwork system. These construction projects were meant to increase the skill set of our building team in preparation for participating in a large housing complex next to the demonstration site. We also built terraces with a team of Yemenis who trained a team of our Saudi Bedouin in terrace construction to assist in water harvesting in the mountains and prepare for work on our next site. In 2014, the Al Bayda project was recognized by His Royal Highness Khalid Al Faisal, the Governor of Mecca Province, as an exceptional demonstration of sustainable development. By 2016, we had a cohort of 120 local tribesmen working on the project, split between 8 different teams working in the mountains or in construction. In those years, I had gone from being a stranger to a guest to a brother. The bonds we created through working together toward a common purpose are the kind that will last the rest of our lives. In the summer of 2016, we reached a crucial turning point. Our demonstration site was more or less complete, and we saw multiple indicators of success. For instance, we had used 20,000 cubic meters of water in establishing the site, but we had caused about 50,000 cubic meters to sink into the ground. Thus, we knew we were putting more water in the ground than we were taking out, while making the land more productive. At the same time, during 2016, a significant portion of our funding dried up. Between needing to cut costs and trusting in the results of our system, we took a massive risk. We cut the irrigation to our demonstration site completely, not knowing how much, if any, of our system would survive. And then it did not rain. There was a real possibility that our whole system would die. During this time, the people of Albeida and the people on our team pleaded that we buy tankers of water to irrigate the trees and make sure that at least some survived. But I refused. I refused because I knew that if our system could not survive its own climate, then it was the wrong system. I refused because I knew that if our agroforestry survived Albeida, then it could be applied elsewhere in the region, that it would be ecologically scalable. So we waited for rain, watching the site desiccate and turn brown, and watching our trees die off one by one. Today, this site has been transformed into a dryland savanna. We have seen wild bees return to our mountain and swarm on our site. We have seen a dramatic increase in bird, lizard, and insect populations, even walking sticks. Dozens of new acacia trees and multiple species of forbs and grasses have begun to grow anew. Nature is coming back. Our mineral and water cycles are healing. And an upward spiral of life, compounding on life, has replaced the downward spiral of desertification. The missing piece now is a sustainable grazing system to assist in the biodegradation of plant and woody material and to allow the people to restore their traditional livelihoods. This system can form the backbone of a new, circular, rural economy. 4 of the tree species that we trialed survived and continued to produce during our long period of drought, and these will form the backbone of future agroforestries developed in the region. This is a regenerative agriculture in the desert of Mecca, and it is a system that increases the productivity and carrying capacity of the land, that creates jobs and produces sellable goods, and at the same time reverses desertification, increases biodiversity, creates soil, sequesters carbon, increases freshwater resources, and drastically augments the land's ability to foster life. The implications of this project are massive. The site in Albeida is a geographic fractal, meaning that it follows the same pattern as all the region's watersheds. Just like we had mountains, floods, and a very short floodplain, the entire west coast of the Arabian Peninsula is characterized by watersheds where up to 90% of all fresh water runs into the Red Sea during flood events, rather than nurturing any life on the land. For instance, in Wadi al-Lith, a typical flood releases enough water into the Red Sea to irrigate 130 million of our desert trees for 3 years. In this way, the Albeida project is a living template for the reforestation of 30 million acres of desert, mountains, and coastline along the west coast of the Arabian Peninsula. Just as we harvested our floods to grow a savanna, this region could be transformed into a mix of mountain and desert agroforestries, with mangrove agroforestries and seawater agricultures along the coast. Doing this would cost billions, but could still be done profitably, as it would increase Saudi Arabia's GDP by 3 to 5%, while sequestering enormous amounts of carbon, increasing rainfall, and potentially creating the first rivers in Saudi Arabia since the last ice age. Ultimately, this is the potential for the systems we built in El Beida. But the implications of our work go beyond the application of our actual systems. Today, it is a common belief that people are inherently bad for Earth, that by our very existence we do damage to our home, and that the best thing we can do is reduce our footprint. What most people don't understand is that reducing our footprint means destroying the Earth less quickly. We do not have to settle on being less bad for the Earth. We can actually be good for the Earth. We are not destructive by nature, but by habit, and our potential for destruction is mirrored by our potential for regeneration. The El Beida project shows that if we recognize our role as a keystone species on Earth, then we can become the primary vector for regenerating our planet. When we degrade ecologies, it stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of the real value ecologies have. But by tying rural wealth to ecological function, we can create powerful incentives for people to care for their ecologies rather than to degrade them. Furthermore, tying rural wealth to ecological function lays the foundation for regenerative systems like the one we prototyped in El Beida. Broadly applied, regenerative agricultures and regenerative economies have the capacity and potential to address a Gordian knot of challenges that we face all over the planet: rural poverty, food scarcity, freshwater scarcity and aquifer depletion, biodiversity and habitat loss, dead zones in our oceans, deforestation, desertification, soil erosion, and climate change. In sharing the story of the El Beida project, I hope that millions of people are inspired and thousands of projects launched to develop similar regenerative systems. The El Beida project, to date, only encompasses a very small watershed in a forgotten corner of Saudi Arabia. But it is also living proof of what we can do when people work with each other and with nature. It is a testament to the potential of regenerative agricultures and a template for the reforestation of millions of hectares of desert landscapes in the Arabian Peninsula and beyond.